Recording, and welcome to today's live class. We're doing the PowerPoint for voting amendments. So we will be filling in the guided notes using Adobe Acrobat and our current PowerPoint for voting amendments. So right now I am going to quickly open up the voting amendments PowerPoint, and then we will get started. So let me share my screen with you. And here we go. All right, so we are going to be, here is our assignment today. So Friday's assignment, here's our PowerPoint and our guided notes. I'm going to go ahead and download the guided notes by clicking on them. It opens it up into another window. At this point, I will download using the arrow up in the upper right corner to click download, and it should save it onto my hard drive. As most of you have already done, you've created an Acrobat. You've downloaded the Acrobat program, so we're going to go in to the Acrobat program now, and I am going to open that one. So I'm going to share a new screen with you now. Right here. Right, there it is. And so here we have our guided notes opened, ready to go. So our first one is going to be talking about how our amendments pass. So let's go check out our PowerPoint and we'll get started with today's lesson. And here we go. Here's our PowerPoint. Now, we've done the first 10 amendments. All right, we know those are the Bill of Rights, and they mainly deal with people's rights. Now, there are another 27 amendments altogether, so another 17. We're not covering all 17, that would be crazy. But there are definitely several amendments that are important in the second set that deal with voting rights. All right, we know from our beginning, citizenship, what it is to be a citizen, and now we're going to see how these different amendments have come across over the years and have established our current voting system. So, again, we covered the Bill of Rights last time, so let's move right into the next stuff. Now, as you can see, our bottom here, there's 27, it was 92. It just limited pay raises because congressmen kept wanting to give themselves more money. But it started with lawsuits from one state to another, must go to federal court. All right, that's great. We don't need to worry about that one. 12 is next. And then 13 and 14 is where we actually start seeing the amendments that we are going to be dealing with the most. So let's go to our benchmark for this quarter. Analyze the impact of the 13th, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th amendments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 altogether is what we're going to be covering. And then we're going to also need to understand the constitutional amendment process. How does it happen? How do we get new amendments? Why was there one in 92? All right, how did they put that out there? We're going to find that whole process out. So let's start there. All right, let's start at the beginning. So we're going to go back real quickly to our slideshow, to our guided notes. So I want to see what our question is again. How are amendments passed? All right, so let's look at our PowerPoint. So there's two ways that this process happens. The first way is where 2/3 of both houses, all right, not one house, not the Senate, not the House of Representatives, but both houses must agree on this. So first off, they vote. They can put one forward. The other way is when we have all the states involved. Now, for those of you that think this whole coronavirus thing is a little crazy and maybe we need to try to take back our country from the federal government, if 2/3 of the states agreed that we need to have what's called a constitutional convention, then yes, that would be perfect. So you have the two ways, again, 2/3 of the Congress, both houses, or 2/3 of the states. They each can propose an amendment. Now, the next thing then would be how to ratify an amendment. So we know what ratification means is to vote to agree upon it, to put it into practice. So to ratify an amendment, it takes, if Congress does it, then the states. So we have federal government and the state government working together, and we get this concept of an amendment starting at the federal government and then the states approving it. We all vote on it. All right. The other way is if the states approve it, they propose it, then 3/4 of the states can approve it. So it's a little different here. So let's go through and, but each approval is based strictly on the state's participation. So let's go and look at our guided notes. We're going to go ahead and fill it out. Oops. So how are amendments passed? So before we fill out, remember we have to click the fill and sign button and then click fill and sign. And now we're able to actually go in and start adding to our worksheet. So let me just get my chat window open in case anybody has any questions. Those are a lot of people who have just come in recently. Please write your questions down, or if you need to raise a hand because you have a question, please feel free to raise a hand and I will try to answer as best as possible. So let's get back into here. How are amendments passed? Well, we know that either 2/3 of both houses of Congress or 2/3 of all the states agree on a proposed amendment. All right, so there we go. We have the beginning part. So we have to have the proposal part. Now we have to have the ratification part. Either are ratified by 3/4 of all the states. All right, so let's make sure we got this. Either 2/3 of both houses of Congress can propose, or 2/3 of all states can agree on a proposed amendment. And then to ratify either one, both of these choices are ratified by 3/4 of all states. All right, so if everybody gets that, that is huge. That's the process. So that's the first, if you go back to our slideshow, that was one of our objectives. And we're going to get it on like the first constitutional amendment process. We should all know now. We could actually go and say it takes 2/3 of Congress, 2/3 of the states to propose, and then 3/4 of the states to ratify. All right. If there's no further questions, we will just keep going. Don't see anything in chat or hands raised, so let's move on. Now, the first 3 amendments that we're going to deal with is 13, 14, and 15. All right. Now, each of these are coming out in relation to the Civil War. All right. So we all know Lincoln, Civil War, slavery. This is what this whole thing was about. So ultimately, before the Civil War ends, Lincoln abolishes slavery. So that is our first one. So we're going to look back at our guided notes. And it says, what are the three amendments from 1865 to 1870 called? And those were called the, Civil War amendments. Makes sense. Happened during the Civil War. So let's go ahead and fill that out. The Civil War amendments. All right, what year was the 13th Amendment passed and what did it do? Well, we saw that one. So the Civil War is from 1861 to 1865. So before the Civil War ends, Lincoln abolishes slavery. So we're going to start out in 1865. And then we're going to say what it did. It abolished slavery. Oops, I didn't type. Try it again. Abolished slavery. All right, pretty straightforward. 13, abolish slavery. All right, now let's see whose face is on the slide, the screen of the slide with the 13th Amendment. Let's go look. So, whose face is that? Come on, type it out in chat. Who is that? I'm looking. Nobody's typing. Everybody can hear me. Yes. I'm not muted, am I? No. All right. How about I unmute everybody? Anybody can say who that person is.
Lincoln.
Lincoln. Oh my gosh. All right.
Yay.
Yay. So here we have Abraham Lincoln. So let's add him in. He is the guy who's responsible for getting us out of the Civil War, for saving our nation and ending slavery. So Abraham Lincoln. All right, now we're going to move on to the 14th Amendment next. And there are four protections and rights listed in the 14th Amendment. So we're going to just put our cursor right there and let's go back to our PowerPoint. So 14th Amendment, this is now 3 years after the Civil War is over. Lincoln's already dead, unfortunately, but his vision is going to be shown over these next two amendments, the culmination of what his life work was. So now we have this 14th Amendment. This is the one that we learned about way back in the beginning of our year when we learned about what it was to be a citizen, because there was no definition of citizenship based on the original Constitution. This was something added later, 1868. So here goes the 14th Amendment. All persons, excuse me, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, they've already been, slaves have already been abolished, so they are now considered citizens. If they're a citizen, they cannot be excluded from citizenship, and this guarantees that. By creating this amendment, it said anybody that follows what is an example of a citizen, all right, we know it now, to be born on the soil, but there's still, races we're still dealing with, other nationalities, other nations, but this was strictly targeted for slavery. All right, you can see that in the bottom. This amendment was designed to grant citizenship to and protect the civil liberties of recently freed slaves. That's what its purpose was. So, what are the four things that it defends? Well, first thing we know is that it defines citizenship. All right, so we're going to go ahead and add that into our guided notes. Defines citizenship. And that we learned from the beginning of the year. So if you weren't here from the very beginning of the year, understand most everybody got that. All right, we know that what it means to be a citizen. All right. And if you need to, you can always go back to the early prep works lessons on citizenship and do them if you haven't completed those yet. All right, let's see what the second thing that they did. It established state laws. All right. Now, ultimately, it was set up so that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and rights. But what we're going to see, because we already know what happens, segregation take place. And when did that happen? That was 1896. All right, so here's 68. So another less than 30 years, we're going to see segregation become legal. And so while the 14th Amendment established that states couldn't do what ends up happening, it's because of the fact that we were still dealing with this slavery issue, and how do you transfer a whole race of people into your nation? Most people didn't want it, and we still even see racism to this day. There's a gentleman that was an African American that was just killed this week for jogging in a white neighborhood. They claimed it was a burglar, and they shot him. Just happened to be caught on video, and so it's kind of racism still exists, unfortunately, but there are now laws to ensure that even if it does exist, that the people that had those rights taken away, those that did it will suffer great consequences for doing it. So we know that let's go back. So it now says that state laws have to be constitutional. All right, because if you see here, before the 14th, only federal laws had to be constitutional. Now state laws also have to be constitutional. So let's add that in. Oops. State laws have to be constitutional. All right. And if you even want to add a little dramatic effect on it, we could go into here and bold this. No, can we bold it? No, we could caps though. Let's do HAVE. All right, state laws have to be constitutional. So we're really placing emphasis on this idea because we understand how the Constitution works and laws. That's what we've already learned. All right, so we're going to move on to our third part. All right, it has equal protection under the law. All right, so we call it the Equal Protection Clause. No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All right, so equal protection under the law. Let's write that one in. Equal protection under the law. Now, we know, because we've already done the landmark cases, that this is not always true, that there have been new amendments or laws that have been, or new cases that have affected certain amendments that we thought were in place, but weren't truly in place. Gideon versus Wainwright, everybody gets a lawyer. In Ray Galt, even teenagers have rights. Miranda versus Arizona, no self-incrimination. So these things have continue to be worked on, but it's established that everybody's equal under the law in the 14th Amendment. All right, here's our last one then. Number 4 will be Oops, what did we miss? We missed one here. Let's see. There are 4. Amendment, citizenship, federal laws, equal amendment clause. Well, I don't know why he put 4 in. We'll do, for the 4th one, let's add this in. It was designed to help the newly freed slaves. All right, that's what it said on the first slide. I just assumed it was an overview, so we'll just add that in here right at the end. So the 4 parts we have, again, define citizenship. State laws have to be constitutional. You have equal protection under the law. And then lastly, it was designed to help the newly freed slaves. All right, so let's keep moving along to number 15. So the 15th Amendment, we are now 2 years later, and they're establishing, even though they've had technically, they're citizens, we haven't established any kind of voting rights yet. But we had to establish citizenship first, right? Makes sense. Citizen, then you can vote. Become a citizen, then you can vote. So you're going to have citizenship in the 14th, voting rights in the 15th. So you get the right of the African-American man to vote. So let's add this one in. Define the 15th Amendment. We have gives African American men. Now we're going to bold that. Men, the right to vote. All right, so remember, when we started this out, the very first thing we saw was citizenship was white male property owners. No women, white male property owners. Now, we've added into it African American men can now join. So they can vote. Still no women, white or African American, but African American have now an equal vote to white male Americans. All right, here we go. We're jumping 4 to number 19. And here we go. This is the big one. So ladies, this is 19. You want to remember this one because this gave you the right to vote. All right, suffrage. Now, suffrage sounds like, oh, I'm suffering. Oh, my life is horrible. No, that's not the kind of suffering. Suffrage actually means just the right to vote. That's the definition for it. Now, I don't know, let me look real quick back to our guided notes. Do we define suffrage? Yes, we do. There it is. So let's go ahead and type it in here. The right to vote. All right, so that's what it is. So anybody can have suffrage. All right, we just dealt with the suffrage of African American men. They now have the right to vote. So who has the right to vote in the 19th Amendment? Women. All right, so we're going to type it in. Women win the right to vote. Period. It is called the women's suffrage movement. All right, so we understand suffrage means right to vote, but the 19th Amendment is in reaction to the women's suffrage movement, which ultimately got women the right to vote. And women win the right to vote. And what year was that again? Let's double check that. 1920. So African American men have been voting for 50 years by the time we get to the giving the women the right to vote. And this helped both white women and African American women. So let's add that date in there, and then we'll go to our next slide. Women win the right to vote in 1920. Whoops. That didn't type. In 1920. And it's called the women's suffrage right. All right. So here we go. We're now going to the 24th Amendment. We're skipping 5. Does that mean we need to know those 5? No. We're just covering the voting rights amendments only. So now let's go to the 24th Amendment. Now, this is a very interesting one. Simply, the answer is no poll taxes. But you might be saying, well, what is a poll tax? So here it is at the bottom. Poll taxes. States charge money to vote to try to stop African Americans from voting. Remember, this is all part of this segregation. If we can keep somebody in control and check, we have power over them and we can limit their freedoms. So segregation, again, limited African American freedoms. Here, we've now, segregation's outlawed, yet they're still able to impact African American vote, limiting their true freedoms, having 100% real freedom in America. Nobody should have to pay, but they were only charging African Americans. So let's go to we're going to define this as outlawed poll taxes. These were trying to keep African Americans from voting. Oops, no apostrophe there. All right, these were trying to keep African Americans from voting. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. Now, I want to make sure, so I'm going to open up the conversation right now. Does anybody not get the 24th Amendment? A poll tax, a forced charge in order to be able to vote. Everybody got this, yes?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so as long as no questions on this, I just want to make sure. So poll tax, a fee to keep people from voting. All right, so let's go to, now, the next one in our guided notes is not an amendment. This is actually the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So you're going to see a series of acts that take place between 64 and 65. And this is all the culmination of the civil rights movement. If you want to do an interesting story on the civil rights, one of the assignments I was going to do if we had more time was about the civil rights movement, because it is a very important part of history that we don't really talk about enough. But we're just going to cover over it just a little briefly, some of the things that happened right at this very turbulent time in America. So, all right, so here we are. First thing it banned was discrimination in voting. All right, so we've already, we understand poll taxes were in place to keep somebody from voting. Any kind of ban is now outlawed. You ban somebody from voting, you're going to jail. All right, and enforce the voting rights of the 14th and 15th Amendment. So we could click back real quick to the 14th and 15th. We know that these were designed to give slaves equality, citizenship, and then the 15th Amendment, African American right to vote. Again, still to this day at 1965, Africans were still being discriminated against on a regular basis. Oops. So there we go. Now we have 14th and 15th are being enforced. Minority right to vote across the country. So if any other minorities, Indians, Asians, Hindus, not American Indians, but Indian, whatever, any minority in America, now their rights are protected. There's different stages where certain rights are added. You get Japanese rights in one of the amendments, and American Indian rights in another amendment. But by here, now we're saying if you discriminate against any minority, you're going to jail. All right. The fourth one was it outlaws literacy tests. Now, literacy tests. Are you smart enough to vote? You know, if we did literacy tests right now across the United States, half of America wouldn't be smart enough to vote. But that's not a requirement. All right. You just have to be what? A citizen. All right. We know it, it's 18 or older. So nothing can keep anybody from voting anymore. No literacy tests. And lastly, no state or local voting qualifications. Can you write your name? Oh, you can't write your name, you can't vote. No, not anymore. All right. So these are the 5 things. So let's go ahead and fill them out. And we'll start with no discrimination. What was it? Bans, sorry, no voting discrimination. I forgot that word. No voting discrimination. All right. Number 2. Oops, wrong. I'll do 2 and 3. Enforces 14th and 15th, and then minority rights for everybody can vote. All right, so let's do enforces the 14th and 15th amendments. And then we say all minorities have the right to vote and can't be discriminated against. All right. 4th one, I forgot. Let's see. Go back. 4th one is outlaws literacy test and then no voting qualifications. So let's do outlaws literacy tests. And by literacy, we understand that means, are you smart enough to vote? All right, and then, well, here, let's just add that for the sake of comma. Are you smart enough to vote? That way everybody knows exactly what outlaw literacy test means. And then lastly, no qualifications to vote. All right. And we'll add no state qualifications, state or local, I think is what it said. No state or local qualifications to vote. All right, Aiden, very good, no problem. We'll see you. You can finish this. It'll be posted in just a little bit. We'll talk to you again soon. So let's finish off. We got, I think, 2 more and we're done. So, all right. Any questions? Nobody's texting in the chat, no hands raised. Let's knock this thing out. All right, the last couple slides. So here we go. Now here's 26. This was the last of the voting amendments. This helps all of you because most of you will be voting in the next maybe 4 to 6 years, all right, depending on how old you are. So this is really important. My daughter is going to be 18 in August, so she's going to vote in her first election. I can't wait for her to be able to vote. My son is now 18 going on 19. He hasn't voted in an election. He gets to vote this year too. So this is a big deal. 18-year-olds can vote now. And the main reason was why. All right, we've understood about the Vietnam War. Vietnam was a very, very difficult time in America. The hippie movement, you got the counterculture, you got drugs in schools everywhere. But yet they're taking these kids out of school and they're making them go to war. This was the draft, all right, where we forced our teenagers, 18 and up, to go to war. And so they said if they're old enough to go to die, old enough to fight, old enough to die, then they should be old enough to vote. And ultimately, this became an amendment and was added with the 26th Amendment in 1971. So let's go, let's go here. I'm going to fill this one in. So number 11, define the 26th Amendment, all right? 1971 gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. Of 18-year-olds the right to vote. All right. Now, the last thing says describe how all of these amendments expanded the right to suffrage. All right. If we were turning this in, this is what we would have done. You probably would have had like an essay at the end of a test for this, but I'm not going to fill this out in class, but we'll talk about it real quick. What you can see is each one of these in the steps of process established additional races and cultures to be giving them rights to vote. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this and we'll just finish this up here. So we saw from Civil War days, which is all about slavery, where we abolish slavery. You have to abolish slavery first. Then it starts off the series of events of all these different voter rights. You start with the African Americans given the right to vote, or given citizenship, then African American men given the right to vote, then women given the right to vote, and ultimately 18-year-olds given the right to vote. What this does is establishes a broader base of citizenship, all right? What was citizenship in the very beginnings? White male property owners, right? Now we've added more and more people into the citizenship pool, further creating a melting pot of American society and culture, all right? So these are important to understand how this all plays out. They build, all right? We can go back from the beginning of the year and say how each of these different events, what we've covered, has built upon ultimately to an understanding of how the amendments work. All right. So basically, tomorrow you're going to have a worksheet through iCivics, and it works along with our what we've learned today. It reinforces our guided notes. So you want to definitely do tomorrow's assignment. Or sorry, I should say Monday's assignment. Monday will also be a live reteach of the Bill of Rights. So those of you that struggled and are looking forward to the reteach, that will be created on Monday. So you will then be allowed to retake the Bill of Rights quiz. Others of you, I have been communicating with you, trying to get you to start redoing lessons. Tutoring still exists. All right, we're just doing it a little differently now. Now you have to watch a video to tutor. So if you can find the time, go back to some of these quizzes that you did really bad on. You scored a 6 on it, retake it. You scored a 10 on it, retake it. Anything under 80%, you can still retake. So watch the video. I'll send you the link. They're posted all over the place in our assignments page, and so you can find them there, or if you can't find them, I will just send you the link each time. Say, hey, Mr. Hadmer, can I have this link? Great, and I'll send it. Now I'm ready to take the quiz, take it. I put the new grade in, replace the old one. All right, if you happen to score worse, I'm not gonna punish you your second time, but hopefully the reteach should better prepare you for the actual quizzes. Other than that, I am done for today. I hope you guys have an amazing Friday and a wonderful weekend. I will be posting this again probably in about an hour or two. Depends on how long it takes for everything to convert and stuff. So look for it this afternoon. Have a blessed, wonderful weekend. And if you haven't seen it yet, watch Plandemic. It's a 30-minute movie that was just released 2 days ago that'll blow your minds, all about coronavirus. God bless. See you guys tomorrow. If you need any questions, you want to